Elizabeth at A Literary Princess. If you are new here, welcome. I'm a 6-year PhD candidate in English literature with a focus on Victorian women novelists. And as you might expect, I love to read. So today I wanted to talk about rereading. I got this idea from Kelly over at Books I'm Not Reading. She recently did a video on her most reread books, and that got me thinking, what are my most reread books? I know 2 of them, but what are some of the others? And she said that people could steal the idea, so I stole the idea. So I am working off of Goodreads plus my memory, because I only started using Goodreads in 2014, and it also didn't for a really long time count rereads. So some of these are a little bit off because of that, and then some it's just I had been reading them way before. I've also opted to only look at things that I read from middle school onward, so nothing from my elementary school years, because I had this thing as a kid that did continue a little bit into high school. But if I really loved a book, I would reread it over and over and over, right in a row. 2 of these books did have that happen, but they were kind of on the end of where that was happening. And so I'm just opting not to include the elementary school ones, which does mean that some books that I know that I've reread quite a bit are not on here, but I feel I don't know. I just feel it doesn't count. I don't know. Anyway, so let's jump in. So I'm going to be looking at the books that, according to Goodreads, I have read 3 or more times, or that, according to memory, I know I have read 3 or more times. Because if we just looked at things that I only read twice, we'd be here all day. Because I do reread a lot. I enjoy rereading. So the typical trends that I am noticing are that either the books are absolute favorite books, or I had to read them for school, whether that was as a student or as a teacher. So these first 3 that I want to talk about, I have read 3 times each, and all 3 of them are for school. So the first one is Arcadia by Tom Stoppard. I read this for the first time in 2014 for my British Literature Survey course. I then reread it in December of 2022 to see if I wanted to teach it for my own Brit Lit course, and I then reread it again in April of 2023 as my students were reading it, so that I would be able to be up to date for the conversation with them. This is a play that has a dual timeline in the early 19th century and then what was the present day when it was published, which I believe was the 90s, early 90s. (1993). Hey, that's the year I was born. So I really love this play. I gave this 5 stars the first time I read it. I gave it 5 stars the next 2 times I read it. I also have seen it performed live, which was wonderful. I had a really good time teaching it. So this is both a favorite and a book that was for school, I suppose. The next book is Wide Sargasso Sea by Jean Rhys. So similarly, I read this in 2015 for my Global Anglophone Literature course and wrote my final paper on it. And then I reread it in December of 2022 to see if I wanted to teach it. And then I reread it again in April of 2023 to read it along with my class. This is a kind of prequel to Jane Eyre, focused on the character of Bertha Mason and what her life was like before being the mad woman in the attic. Here she is named Antoinette. And it's a great short little book. Again, I'm really glad that I got to teach it. I gave it 4 stars. I think I only gave it 3 stars the first time I read it. It's a postmodern book, so it's kind of fragmented And I think as a 21-year-old, I just was like, this, who's used to Victorian novels, I was like, this is weird. But I do really like it, and I think it was one that's well worth rereading multiple times. And then finally, for the books that I taught, is Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. So I read this for the first time in 2017, not for school. I don't know how I managed to get through school, like high school, undergrad, and a master's degree without reading this book, but okay. I then reread it in December of 2022, and to see if I want, well, I knew I was going to be teaching it. Like, this is the novel you teach when you're teaching Brit Lit, from romantics to postmodern. You teach this for the romantic unit, but I needed a refresher on it because I straight up did not remember it. And then I ended up rereading it again in February of 2023 to read along with my class. I didn't like this that much the first time I read it. I think I had given it 3 stars. But I ended up really liking it upon rereading it. That's a common thing with some of these books, is I read them early and was like, they're fine. And then I reread them and was like, oh, this is actually very good. And I had great conversations with my class about this one, so. And then there is actually one more that I have read mostly for school that I read 3 times, and this is A Room of One's Own, which I first read in June of 2019, right before I started my program. And I guess I just felt that I needed to read it. I had read parts of it before, but never the full text. I then reread it in September of 2021 for my feminist theory course, which I just discussed in a recent video. And then I read it again in March of 2023 because I taught it to my students as part of our modernism unit. This one always goes back and forth between 3 and 4 stars for me. So I don't know. I think the first time I gave it 3 stars, the next time I gave it 4 stars. The time after that I was more like 3.5, maybe 4. I don't know. I don't know why it goes up and down like that for me, but it just does. But yeah, I've read this 3 times. I'll probably read another few. And now we get into ones that I have read 3 times because they are favorites. And the first of these is Winter Song by S.J. Jones. This is one of my favorite fantasy novels. I read it when it first came out in February of 2017. And then I read it again in 2017 in September. So this is one of the kind of rare books in my adult life that I read twice in 1 year. We do have a few more of those later in the video. And then I read it again in March of 2021. And you know what? I think I might read it again this December for Remember December, because I've read it's a duology, and I've read this one multiple times. I have only read the second one once. And I feel like I should reread the second one, but to do that I need to reread the first one. Anyway, this is a kind of retelling of both Christina Rossetti's Goblin Market and the movie Labyrinth with David Bowie, with some hints of Phantom of the Opera. It follows Liesel, who agrees to marry the Goblin King in order to save her sister. And I love it. I love it so much. One of my favorite fantasy novels. And another of my absolute favorite books, The Secret History by Donna Tartt. This follows a group of students studying ancient Greek and Latin, the classics, at a small liberal arts college in Vermont, and the murder that happens. And why did they commit this murder? That's not a spoiler. It's the first chapter. So I read this for the first time in June of 2016. I remember being really excited to read it. It had been highly recommended by multiple people over on Tumblr that I highly respected, and I adored it. It was 5 stars from the moment I started it, basically. I then reread it in March of 2017, and then reread it again in April of 2019. Although, you know what? I'm thinking I might have reread it one more time, because I remember reading it on audiobook while I was in my program. In April of 2019, I wasn't in my program. I don't know, maybe I'm just misremembering. But yeah, I definitely have read it a few times. This is another one that I might reread during Remember December because I just love it so much. And then there is one more book that Goodreads has me reading 3 times, and it is neither a favorite nor for school. So I don't know how this happened. This is Every Heart a Doorway by Shannon McGuire. I read this for the first time in 2017, and I got it because it's a portal fantasy about these kids who have returned from portal worlds and are struggling to adjust and go to a special school for people who have been to portal worlds. And that's what I wanted from it. And instead I got a murder mystery, and I was like, I really liked a lot of things about it, but the murder mystery put me off, so I only gave it 3 stars. I read it again in April of 2020 and liked it more. I don't remember why I picked it up again, but I did. And then I reread it again in January of 2021, and I think that was for an online book club I used to be part of. I think. Either that or the April 2020 was. One of those was for an online book club, and then one of those, I just don't know. But yeah, this is a 4-star read for me. I like it. Definitely not my favorite in that series, though. And now we are moving into ones that I have read 4 or more times. And some of them I'm like, I'm not sure. So the first one, actually Goodreads only shows me as having read twice, but I know that I have read it 4 times. This is Fangirl by Rainbow Rowell. This came out in 2013 and I read it then. So that was before I started tracking with Goodreads. I then reread it again in June of 2015, right before I went off to my master's program. And then I read it at some point between June and December of 2015 because I did my master's program overseas and I was very homesick, and Fangirl had become one of my comfort books at that time. This used to be a favorite book of mine. I don't think I would call it a favorite now. It follows a girl named Kath who is starting her first year of college. She is a fan fiction writer and is struggling really with anxiety. So I related a lot to her, and as somebody who was, starting a new program far away from home with nobody, I just found comfort in it. And then I reread it again in December of 2017. I'm not sure why. I guess I just wanted to. So 4 times for Fangirl. And now we get to ones that Goodreads says I have read 4 times, but I'm pretty sure I've read 5 times. At least, possibly more. And this is the All for the Game series. The Foxhole Court, The Raven King, and The King's Men. I discovered this series in 2016. Again, during my master's program when I was feeling pretty lonely. And actually, no, you know what? It might have been 2015. No, it was 2016. Never mind. Memory is strange. So I discovered this during my master's program and kind of glommed onto it as a comfort book. Look, it's not good. It is a mafia sports romance with characters who are all terrible people. It's not good. I would never recommend it to anybody, but I don't know. It does something for me. I read it twice since 2016, once early on and then once in May. And then reread it in May of 2017, so a year later. I reread it again in April of 2020. That was during that was during COVID. No wonder I was reading it. Ugh, terrible time. And then it says the last time I reread it was July 2023. I feel like there were a few more in there. I feel like I've read this series more than 4 times, or more than 5 times even. And some of these are just not marked. But yeah, Look, it's my favorite series. It's not good. Don't judge me. It's fine. And then we have the last one that Goodreads shows as I've read 4 times, but I've definitely read more than 4 times. And that is Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte. So I read this for the first time when I was 15 years old, which was 2008. That kind of hurt. That kind of hurt to say. All right. I know that I reread it in 2014 for college. Or no, it was 2013. It was 2013 because it was the first semester. I wrote a paper for my critical theory course on the Brontes. So I read Jane Eyre, Agnes Grey, and Wuthering Heights. And I don't think I think I'd reread it before that point, but I don't remember. I then reread it again in February of 2016 for one of my master's courses. Reread it again in May of 2018 for apparently the hell of it. Read it in February of 2020 for one of my PhD courses, and then read it in February of 2023 because I was teaching it to my students. This is one of my favorite books ever. It's not surprising that I've read it at least 5 times. No, at least 6 times, possibly more. Like, not surprising at all. It's so good. I mean, you know, it's so good. So again, this is one that was for school and is also a favorite because I read it originally for summer reading for high school and then have read it for multiple classes and to teach it. And sometimes just because I love it. And now we get to the ones that I call uncountable. And this is because I have read them so many times that I just don't know anymore. And the first of these is one that has always been for school because I hate it. I truly hate this book. This is Walden by Henry David Thoreau. I read this my junior year of high school. I had to read it twice during my undergrad. I might have had to read it more than twice during my undergrad. Oh, God. I had to read it. I think I didn't have to read it for my master's, which was nice, but I have had to read it for PhD courses. So I don't even know how many times I've had to read it. I feel like this just gets shoved down my throat constantly, and I hate it. I hate it. I gave it 2 stars the last time I read it because I was like, okay, it's got some merit, I guess. But don't like this book. Don't like it at all. And the last 2 uncountable ones are because they are favorites. And the first is The Body by Stephen King. It's part of the collection Different Seasons. I first read this in middle school, and this is one of the ones where I finished it and was like, wow, and then immediately started reading it again. And did that again and again. I don't know. It's a thing that I did as a kid. It obviously carried on into middle school a bit, and it carried on a little bit into high school as well. But in addition to reading it, I don't know how many times as a 12-year-old, I have reread it periodically throughout my life. Every few years, I suppose. It only shows up on my Goodreads as having read it in 2016 and 2015. Which I guess the last time I read it was in 2016. Wow. I should reread this. It's been a while, apparently. But yeah, it had been so many times before that. And then the final book, I don't think anyone who's been here for a while is surprised, is Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte. So I read this for the first time as a 14-year-old in my first year of high school. Not for school, just for fun. And again, I did the same thing. I finished it, was like, wow. And then read it again. And did that at least twice that year. And then I reread it like kind of periodically. So Goodreads is only showing 2 reads for it. One in February of 2016, which was for a class, for a master's class, and then again in January of 2018. But I also have it marked as read it twice in 1 year, which means that on one of those reads I read it twice in that same year, and then of course I know that I have read it a bajillion times before that. I've written multiple papers on this. I wrote 2 papers on it in my undergrad. I wrote my master's thesis, one of the chapters on that. I don't think I presented on it in high school. I just like worked it in wherever I could. So this is my absolute favorite book ever, so it's not surprising that I've read it as many times as I have. But I wish that Goodreads reflected that, but when it didn't count rereads, and I didn't have it a lot of the times that I was reading it, because I don't even think it was a thing when I was in high school, but oh well. So those are the books that I have reread the most. And again, it's really interesting. It's either absolute favorites, books for school, or absolute favorites that I also had to read for school. And then Every Heart a Doorway thrown in there for some reason. So this has just been kind of a little rambly chat about rereading and what books I've reread. I would love to hear down in the comments below, what books have you reread the most? Are there any books that you really want to reread? Have you read any of these books? What did you think of them? If you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to see more of my bookish content. It has been great chatting with you. I will see you soon. Bye.